So we get to chapter 3 of Enough today. Just a couple reminders. Philippians 4, verse 5, let your gentleness be known to everyone. The Lord is near. That's not a threat, by the way. Sometimes people say, the Lord, like Jesus is watching, be on good behavior. That's not what that is. It's what I would offer is that the gentleness that we can share into the world is a witness to the nearness of God. That's part of our witness, that into the harshness of the world that, again, so many people suffer, that the gentleness we can offer is a balm that the world so thoroughly needs. Just a reminder, this is our schedule. We're on week 3, cultivating contentment. And then just, again, a reminder, some of our centering verses, this passage from Matthew 7, this reminder that the place for us to start is by looking in the mirror, to pay attention to the logs in our own eyes before we try to pick out the specks in others' eyes. So like I said, it's cultivating contentment today. And maybe one of the things in your small group that you could even talk about, I don't think this question is in the discussion questions, and admittedly, I don't even know if you even get to the discussion questions. I think you have such rich relationships and conversations that you're like, we don't need this paper, we got this. But you can even talk about what does contentment look like for you? What does it feel like to be content? Is contentment even possible for some of us? Or is it that we are just living in a world, or we're living lives of perpetual discontentment? This morning, our daughter was out on the driveway scraping off her car before she drove. She's a high school senior, and then the high school and the middle school are just across the street from each other, so it's really great. So she can take her 8th grade brother with her to school. So she started the car. Hannah was scraping up the car. Ian was not being helpful. He was sitting in the car. What can you do with little brothers? He at least was ready on time, so we didn't hear his name screamed in the house at any point. So, and they were leaving at the same time I was. She was scraping off her car, and she said, it would be really nice to have a 3-car garage. It's like, you have a car. It just, but I think it's those. So that, again, that's me stopping and trying to look in the mirror to think about, and it's not just me comparing to be like, when I was your age, I didn't have a car, and I didn't, and that was fine. And a couple houses ago, we had a 1-car garage. So it's just an interesting thing. It brought to mind the things that she was a little irritated that she had to scrape off her car. But then what it called out to me is, what are those things that irritate me that perhaps I should look at the good that I have, and then kind of what maybe comes along with it, versus seeing, oh my gosh, what a burden to bear. I had to scrape 1/8 of an inch of ice off my car. So speaking of contentment, does anyone know what this is? I brought visual aids today. A scale, it kind of looks like it's not. So I just want you to know how strong one of your pastors is, not me. This is the front of our dishwasher. And so, Pastor Karen, or as I call her, Karen, was in our kitchen and, was opening the dishwasher. And we knew there's like this little plastic clip that had broken a long time ago. And so we just kind of knew there was a trick, and we had to be gentle, but, whatever. And a couple days ago, she, gently pulled and then just ripped this thing off. And like all these little plastic bits started falling all over the place on the floor. And, and it's an old dishwasher. It was in the house. We've never bought a dishwasher. Every house that we've had, our first house, we didn't have a dishwasher, and we've never replaced one. So we knew this was at the end of its life. And so we went, and first time in our lives, went dishwasher shopping. Not anything I'd ever aspired to do, but we kind of like having a dishwasher and everything else. So, literally our old one broke, was used up, and we went to the store, nice salesperson, everything else. Like I said, we've never bought a dishwasher. And he started showing us like what the dishwashers offered, like what their features were. And maybe, there's like this third rack on top. You know about the third rack? I had no idea. There's this third rack. He was talking about this European drying technique that one brand had. Can't even pronounce the word of the element that was in it to make it happen. And you know what? We're going to get a new dishwasher because our old one's broken. But it also brought to mind, like, I didn't even know these things existed, and my life was okay. Like, he was trying to talk about how quiet the dishwasher, like, I don't know what the decibel level is of our current dishwasher, about how dry the dishes get. And like, if you have this one, then none of the, it dries in this way, so none of the water will pool on top of the plastic. Like, we got towels. It's this thing that kind of creeps in our lives. And that's even with Hannah's thing. Like, well, I wish we had a 3-car garage so my car can be in the, and like, I wish my dishwasher, now I can't imagine having a dishwasher without a third rack, and we haven't even bought a dishwasher yet. And it's like, I didn't even know my life wasn't complete without this thing. Like, I thought life was good, and then it's like, oh, I could have a third rack where we can put cups and silverware, and my life is worse now because I don't have that thing. And so I think it's just an interesting thing, these new features that get added, and then in retrospect, we realize we were actually okay without them. And it's not to say that it's wrong. Like I said, we're gonna get a new dishwasher. It's gonna have a third rack on top. That, like, we saw that, it's like, no, this is happening. But like, we also know we don't need it. Life was fine with that. We're doing dishes by hand, and we got like teenagers. So there's a lot of dishes, and we can do that too. So we understand that this is a privilege to even have a dishwasher, let alone one that will theoretically have a third rack, and apparently get dishes really dry. I don't know. And so that's the idea of planned obsolescence too. That there are. I got this plastic key that dropped over here. So anyone need any buttons for a dishwasher? If your buttons break off, let me know. I got extra buttons. But this idea that products are made in order to either go out of style or to intentionally wear out in a truncated fashion so that we go and buy more. It's what a lot of industries are built upon. In order to have things go out of style quickly in order to be replaced. It's what the fashion industry thrives on. It's not like a lot of our clothes aren't useful anymore. It's just somehow tastemakers have decided this is the cut of pants that's fashionable and stylish now. However, then if you just kept them 15 years from now, we've all been around long enough to know that it's all coming back in style. And whatever style even is, I don't even know. But it happens all over, and it's not a new phenomenon either. It's fascinating. I've been reading a lot about kind of how our consumer economy evolved and became what it is over the course of the 20th century. And so there's this a book by Elizabeth Cohen called A Consumer's Republic. The subtitle is The Politics of Mass Consumption in Post-War America. So this is a quote from the book. The head of styling at Ford, George Walker, explained the challenge. Quote, "We design a car to make a man, of course, unhappy with his 1957 Ford long about the end of 1958. His counterpart at competitor General Motors was even more ambitious. Quote, in 1934, the average car ownership span was 5 years. Now it is 2 years. When it is 1 year, we will have a perfect score." So that's the idea that, especially in that day and age, that car manufacturers, General Motors' goal was to have everyone replace their car every year because it was good for business. And then that's also what we've been told is our core identity is as consumers. And so then in order to live into that identity, you have to keep up by having the latest thing. So, this car's, this one's got 13 cup holders. Well, you need one with 15 because, it seems ridiculous, but that's also, if we pay attention, that's kind of what happens. I remember when Karen and I were serving a church in Ames, Iowa, and there was a guy in our the weekly men's morning Bible study. His name was Kerry, and he drove just this old beat up Ford F-150. It had to be at least 20 years old, and just kind of made weird sounds and was clearly an old, well-used pickup, but he just kept driving it. And I just thought, we were talking about some of these things about contentment and whatever, and I just kind of reflected on that, sent him an email, and just said, hey, I think, I think it's a great witness that you continue to drive this vehicle that still works, but isn't the, kind of the latest and greatest. And he wrote me back. He's like, I'm so embarrassed by my car because I look around in the parking lot and everyone else drives these other things, but I don't need that. And Ames is a very small town. I mean, if you're not traveling a lot, you don't have to, a moped can get you most places. So he saw what he actually needed. He had something that he needed. Didn't have a car payment, and the repairs, because he didn't have to drive very far, were pretty minimal. So it all worked out for him. But he also, it was interesting how for him it was important because of his values, but also a little bit of a source of embarrassment because he didn't fit in with the other cars in the lot. I want to, I've been sharing some poems, and I've got song lyrics today instead. So this is from a band called Fugazi, and just looking at this crowd, none of you have listened to Fugazi. And I'm going to say don't go listen to Fugazi, because you're not going to like Fugazi. I'm always a little tentative to share my musical tastes, because then you're going to think things about me that A, probably aren't true, but B, I don't want you to think about me, even if they're not true. So Fugazi was a band from Washington, D.C. They're a hardcore punk band founded in 1986, kind of disbanded around 2003. They have a very clear ethos. They were considered one of the pioneers of what was called the straight edge movement. So straight edge meant a group that was committed to having no drugs, no alcohol, no sex. So the straight edge. So kind of in counterpoint to a lot of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll ethos. But along with that, they had a very strong idea about just how the music industry gets commoditized. And so they were very clear that they would charge $5 for a ticket. And so they would go to venues where they could have a ticket price of $5. I don't know if you've bought concert tickets anywhere. They cost more than $5. But also because they were smart about knowing who their audience was and how to work with venues and everything else, they wound up having profitable tours and being able to make a living. They were never huge rock stars. You've probably never heard of Fugazi before today. And their CDs were always $8. I remember going into Best Buy, and there's the Fugazi Red Medicine CD, $8. All the other CDs, $15, $16, and they just had it printed right on the label, $8. If you pay, and it even said, if you pay more than this, you're getting ripped off, because they, had that, and so they were able to do that. And then also what they did is they produced no band merchandise because it made it for a more nimble tour. So they were very do-it-yourself ethos. So they would set up their own equipment, they would travel, they would take it down, and then when you got all these T-shirts and other stuff that you have to carry along with you, then that adds to your overhead. So if you ever see it, and again, you're never going to see a Fugazi T-shirt, but if you ever do, it's a bootleg one. Because they've said that you can't, they've never licensed and never created any of their own merchandise. So they have this song then called Merchandise, which is ostensibly about the music industry, but that I think has something to say to us. And what's interesting is I hear some gospel truth in this. This is not a Christian band, at all. But there's something in here that I think resonates, at least as I hear it, with a lot of what we've been dealing with throughout Enough. So the first verse of the song goes, "When we have nothing left to give, there will be no reason for us to live." I mean, doesn't that sound like, that could be a Jesus-y sort of thing. I mean, that if we are, followers of Jesus, our lives are about figuring out how can we give, how can we let go of what God has entrusted to us, how can we serve others. So if we have nothing left to give, there's no reason. So that's kind of the purpose of life sort of deal. But when we have nothing left to lose, you will have nothing left to use. And so that's their cut against the commoditization of the music industry, to say, we're actually bringing nothing to this game, so then you can't use us. We're not going to be under your thumb. We owe you nothing, you have no control. Then the last line of the song, though, I think resonates really well. You are not what you own. You are not what you own. So I think that's something worth, it stops me cold every time I hear it. It might be something worth considering. What are the ways that we capitulate to the idea that we are what we own, and how might the good news of Jesus Christ free us from that? So again, don't go listen to Fugazi, but read these lyrics. So we've got the parable of the rich fool in front of us today. Verse 15 is the one that gets highlighted a lot in this particular chapter. If you've read it, you've encountered it. If you're going to read the chapter, you will encounter it. If you don't plan on reading the chapter, you're going to encounter it now because I'm going to read it. But I'll just share the entire parable because I think it's worth hearing and, again, keeping in mind. So some in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." Interesting. Last week we dealt with an inheritance. This week we deal with an inheritance. So this idea of generations and the passing along of possessions is not a new concept for us. But Jesus said to him, "Friend, who set me to be a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he, Jesus, said to them, "Take care. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." Then he told them a parable. "The land of a rich man produced abundantly, and he thought to himself, 'What should I do? For I have no place to store my crops.' Well, if you remember a couple weeks ago, you go and you rent a storage facility. And then he said, 'I will do this. I'm going to build my storage facility. I will pull down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your life is being demanded of you. And the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So it is with those who store up treasures for themselves, but are not rich towards God.'" So you can unpack in your groups this parable a little bit more. The one piece I would just like to highlight a little bit is that line, "This very night your life is being demanded of you." You can read that to say, okay, God's saying you're dying tonight and you don't essentially have your estate, your affairs in order because you've been so focused on yourself. That's one possible reading. Your life is being demanded of you. You can also read it to see your life being demanded of you is to think about what is it that makes up a life. And so he has these goods, these possessions, these abilities, these insights. I mean, it's not just an accident he's been able to have the sort of produce. I mean, you can't be, can't is too strong, but he may not be a total dope and have, accumulated these things, but it's for what ends, for what purpose are they? So what I hear this God saying is, this very night your life is being demanded of you, is like, there's the opportunity to put these things out of which you've made your life to good use, but they're just sitting in a barn while you're sitting around eating, drinking, and being merry. Eating, drinking, and being merry, it's okay, but not at the expense of overlooking others to indulge ourselves. So it could be that there are these opportunities to put those things that those bigger barns were built to hold, to put those things to good use rather than just sitting in the barn. So then the question becomes, what might Jesus be saying to me today? And am I ever prone to build bigger barns? Or what do I do with what's in my barn of whatever size it is? Another passage that gets highlighted in this chapter is from Hebrews chapter 13. It's verses 5 and 6. Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have. For he has said, I will never leave you or forsake you. So we can say with confidence, the Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me? So those are perhaps good words to hold on to in the midst of times of uncertainty or times when we feel pressured to keep up with the Joneses or whatever it might be. This reminder that God says, I will never leave you or forsake you. We can remember the Lord is our helper. I will not be afraid. That's one of those things that runs through Scripture. And we've heard this, do not be afraid. Do not fear. Do not fear. And so I wonder at what point, not at what point. I wonder how many of the decisions we make are driven by some sort of fear inside us. A fear of not having enough, a fear of loneliness, a fear of not fitting in. Might be worth thinking about what might some of those fears be that we face, and then how can we hold on to God's promises that we don't have to fear, that God is with us, that God provides us with what we need. So with this idea that's in front of us about being consumers and that kind of being a main source of our identity, the chapter talks about this just a little bit, and so I just want to take a moment to just, have you heard the phrase church shopping before? Yeah, we're aware of that. Let me be clear. I don't want you to hear what I'm not saying, okay? So I'm not saying that it's not okay for people to go to different churches or to change churches. That's not at all what I'm saying, because that's a completely understandable thing, and that makes sense. So that's not what I'm saying. What I want to highlight, though, is the phraseology that we use. Church shopping. So what that does is it makes me the focus. It keeps me as my identity as a consumer, that the focus is on me shopping rather than seeing my participation, my involvement, my membership in a community as being a part of what God is doing, or about what God's mission is for a particular congregation. And so maybe that's just splitting hairs. But I think words are really important, and how we use words and what words we use are important. Maybe I just say that to justify the fact I've got a linguistics degree, so then it makes me feel like, okay, it was worth it. All those student loans were worth it. But I think words are important. And so again, it's not that changing churches is a bad thing. There are good reasons to change churches. You might get to the end of this enough thing, or even this like, I got to get out of this place. So, okay, as long as it's about where God is leading you. Because what we should caution against and be very careful about is that the church, big C or individual congregations, we are not, as churches, providers of religious goods and services. And then as participants, as members, as attenders, as worshipers, we're not consumers of the religious goods and services that a church would provide. that we bring something to the community. That worship isn't about me sitting back and saying, well, that song was good. This one I'd give a 3. That one had a good beat. The sermon, I liked the story. Then I got bored, and then I wanted to look at my phone. And then there was a joke, and I laughed at that. And then the prayers weren't very good, and then the reader was cute because it was a 3rd grader who knew how to do her arm. I mean, if you were in worship last weekend, those 3rd graders, man, incredible readers. But anyway, because that's not what it is. I mean, if the music's, not what we want, what are we bringing to it? If we're disengaged with what's going on, how are we re-engaging with it? So in worship, and you're great examples because you're showing up on a Wednesday morning. I mean, in the eyes of a lot of people, you could be doing a lot better things. So you've got this commitment here, and then how can we share that and help embody that in a way to be invitational so that others would want to be a part of what we're experiencing, what we value as well. So it's simply to say it's not about, well, I didn't get much out of it, but it's about how much did I bring into it. And my guess is when you go to have your small group conversations, the best ones you have are when you're invested in it and you know that one another are invested in it. Because that's how you know one another. And it's incredible to see and hear about the relationships like that happen in Word for Women, and it's because you bring yourselves into it. And then how can we take that? And that's such a gift. How can we take that and keep sharing that out among this community and beyond? And so that's, I think, just something worth holding on to move away from that commerce model and into that community model. Because then we also see it like with weddings. Have you been to weddings? You've been to weddings? So Karen and I, we'll have been, Chris knows weddings. She just had to, have a significant role. So Karen and I are coming up on our 24th anniversary next month. And we were the first people in our kind of peer group to get married. And this is even like, we got married. This is going to sound, it's like we've been married so long, we were married last millennium, A lot of us were. But so we didn't know what we were doing. And we were in seminary, which is a dangerous thing. But we didn't know what we were supposed to do, so we just kind of made it up because we was like, well, we know what the order of worship is. We're seminary nerds, and so we're going to do these things. And so we did it, just did our wedding and then whatever. And then as we kept going to weddings, and then the other thing that started happening shortly after our wedding, this is just coincidence. There's no causation or even correlation here. But then what started happening as well was TLC, the TV station, started putting on shows about weddings. And so you start watching on TV about these weddings and productions, and so soon what we have growing is what I call the wedding industrial complex. And so then there are these expectations heaped upon weddings that this has to be that. And then like I've met with couples, and they're like, well, this wedding had that and that, so we have to have those things, plus we need to top them somehow by putting this in there as well. Because it's about kind of having an event that somehow supersedes the other ones because it becomes kind of unmoored from what it's about. And then some of the statistics get shocking as to what weddings cost. And people going into hock just for this one day. And it's an important day, and it's worth having parties. Don't get me wrong, but the lengths to which people go for that. And then, so that's kind of one thing. Kind of a troubling thing I've been noticing is happening more and more with funerals now, too. That funerals are starting to become kind of events, which is kind of a weird thing. Because especially as the church, this should be about Jesus and the resurrection. That's what we need to hear, is the promise of resurrection, not about having a memorable event. So anyway, it's the whole church shopping thing. Again, change churches, that's fine. But don't shop for a church. Be called to a church. So anyway, but I think what I think we find, if our primary identity is that of a consumer, is that what that brings with it is perpetual discontent, because it's never enough. And so what we're trying to ground ourselves in is God's promise of abundance, that there is enough. And so there are a couple lists that are in this chapter that I think are worth highlighting. So 4 ways to cultivate contentment. It's on your handout. It's on those pages that are noted in the book. So the first one, remember that it could be worse. I'm pretty lukewarm at that one. I don't know that that's super helpful. Someone has it worse. I guess it's kind of helpful from a perspective, but then whatever. Talk about that if you want. I like the second one, though. Ask yourself, how long will this make me happy? Especially if you're thinking about buying something or doing whatever. What do I think the outcome will be? How long will this make me happy? I mean, the joke is, we see kids on Christmas and they tear through their presents and they're bored of them by the next day, the next hour. I don't know what your kids and grandkids do. But it's not just kids that do that either. It's us grown-up types too. So how long will this make me happy? And that kind of ties to earlier in the book, you talk about the 24-hour rule. So especially before making a significant purchase, to wait at least 24 hours before clicking buy or walking through the checkout with the thing, whatever it is, to really kind of process through, is this, whatever this is, worth it? Number 3 is really important. Develop a grateful heart. And there's a discussion question about that, about, what does it look like to focus on those parts of our lives for which we are grateful, and how can we keep a focus on our gratitude through it? And then number 4, ask yourself, where does my soul find true satisfaction? I mean, like where does that come from? That feeling of satisfaction or fulfillment or meaning or purpose? Is it what grounds us in that? And then 5 ways to simplify our lives. And so then this is even just worth thinking about, do I think any of these are possible? Maybe I'm practicing some of these. Maybe I never thought about some of these. Maybe I tried it and it didn't work. I wonder why. But set a goal of reducing your consumption and live below your means. It's interesting. Karen and I have good friends, and I'm not bragging. I'm just we've got good friends, full stop. No, we have good friends who have reflected with us that as they've progressed in their careers, as many of us do, we experience upward mobility. I mean, that's kind of, again, the goal in our culture. We're kind of taught we're supposed to be upwardly mobile. You get a promotion, you make more money, et cetera, as you go on in life, and then you get to a point where your financial advisor says, all right, you're good. That's just what it is. But what was interesting is our friends were reflecting on their path, and then what they realized is that they hadn't been as these different things had happened, as they'd gotten to different stages of their lives, as they'd gotten promotions, as their household income had increased, what they found, though, is that, and they shared, and it was a great moment of candor, that they were not being intentional about saying, but what do we need? What they kind of saw was like, well, we've got more income, so we can just spend more. So they weren't ever kind of changing anything other than having more stuff and redoing their house and whatever. And so they were feeling stuck because even though, materially they seemed better off, they weren't, as they were reflecting, they admitted they didn't feel like they were being very thoughtful about what was happening along the way. And so then that triggered in them the desire to have that conversation and say, what is it that we need? And how can we use, rather than just going on and say, well, now we can get a bigger fill in the blank because we've got more income, to say, well, what if we keep our expenses the same, and then we can do something different with that? You can give it away, you can put it to a different use, whatever that might be. But that idea of living below our means is, could be worth pursuing. The second one, which kind of relates to what we were saying earlier, before making a purchase, ask yourself, do I really need this? Why do I want this? I think those are important questions again. And part of it, I mean, it's a spiritual discipline, right? To be able to be reflective enough, especially in the moment, to ask these sorts of questions. Because they're not easy questions for me to think through either at all. Number 3, use something up before buying something new. So even though with dishwashers, like Karen and I are really good, we can use up a dishwasher apparently like no one's business. There's other stuff, though, like my friend Carrie in his car, I will admit, that's a growing edge for me, is to be like, I don't need to have a car that's, latest or greatest or anything else. So that idea that we can use things up. And that's even the idea of buying quality over quantity. Like, it's okay to have nice things, but then use it up. And then that can kind of counteract some of I love Adam Hamilton's story about his one black suit that he has. And it's double-breasted, I mean, dude. But there's something to that there's a reason there are classic styles. And then if you buy something that's quality, it's good, it's fine. And that can be a thing that we enjoy and cherish. And then also, we don't suffer from overchoice. You get to your closet and be like, well, what am I going to wear? There's too many choices that I can't possibly. It's like going to the supermarket and trying to buy, like we were talking the other day, like trying to buy, I don't remember, it was peanut butter or jelly. It doesn't matter. It's like impossible to do. Because it's like, what jelly do you want? Well, do you want jelly? Do you want jam? Do you want preserves? What flavor do you want? What make? Do you need sugar or non-sugar? Do you want organic? I mean, I just want some strawberry jam. But it's this big thing. So, but use something up before buying something new. Number 4, plan low-cost entertainment that enriches. And there's just kind of that piece that he adds in there about paying attention to where have you made memories in your life. And oftentimes, like as I've reflected, that sparked in me, it's usually with with families around the dinner table or around the card table. It's playing games or it's sitting around talking. Doesn't tend to be, I don't know, are they selling seats on the spaceships yet? I don't know. I don't know that would be a thing for me. Number 5, ask yourself, are there major changes that would allow me to simplify my life? And that's just to think, especially if we feel stuck, we maybe don't have to feel stuck, that there are ways out of it. Then just a couple little excerpts that I want to, I'll actually hold these, I think, till next week, because I want you to have this time. So I will read from Never Enough next week, and then also from the book Out of Sorts by Sarah Bessey, but they're both about scarcity versus abundance. And so the chapter kind of gets at that a little bit. But just I want to talk a moment about contentment and Sabbath, because as I've contended for a long time, is that Sabbath is the only one of the 10 commandments anyone ever brags about breaking. And we don't laugh because we realize it's true. Because if we observe Sabbath, if we intentionally disengage and rest, it means we're not achieving and we're not producing. And if our value comes only through what we produce, what we achieve, what we consume, Sabbath is an intentional counter-narrative against that. To say that actually I'm standing against the tide by disengaging, by resting, by saying I trust that I don't have to be out there hustling all the time, and that the world will keep turning even when I rest. And so I think that there's just something really profound about that, because we live in a world that doesn't really allow Sabbath. And so if we talk about contentment and discontentment, typically, and like Pastor Caitlin shared this in the confirmation, so it was a beautiful, beautiful confirmation sermon that she gave. But she shared from St. Augustine that he said, people are our purpose is to love people and use things, and often we get it confused. I mean, that was what St. Augustine said, which is we love things and use people. And so I think part of what we can reclaim in our contentment is to figure out what to be discontent with. Because there is plenty in the world to be discontent with, but typically it's not our material status, especially for folks, like us in this room. And so, like I said, I've got song lyrics today, so I'm going to close with one of the verses from, I don't know if it's my favorite Christmas song, but I like saying it's my favorite Christmas song because it's not what we would expect out of a Christmas song. And this one you should go listen to because it's brilliant. It's The Rebel Jesus by Jackson Browne. And so so it's kind of a critique of how people engage, a very gentle critique, an understanding critique, but just of shining a light onto how disconnected Christmas can be from Jesus. And he admits, he's a pagan in the midst of the song too. So, but this verse, it says, "We guard our world with locks and guns, and we guard our fine possessions. And once a year when Christmas comes, we give to our relations. And perhaps we give a little to the poor if the generosity should seize us. But if any one of us should interfere in the business of why there are poor, they get the same as the rebel Jesus." So what that highlights is the difference between charity, which is good, and justice. We're all good with charity, and charity is a good thing too. So contributing to 3,000 acts of kindness, that's a good thing. But that's to help homeless people. If you want to talk, I've talked with folks who are working to end homelessness, and that's a battle. I'm talking with someone whose job is to work with municipalities, with people, with governments to try to change systems that perpetuate homelessness. And her experience is, I'm just getting arrows shot at me all the time. Because that's a justice issue. We should be discontent with injustice. And so I think there's something to pour through in this to see what this is about, to be discontent about the right things, and then trust that we will continue to be able to cultivate contentment because God does provide enough, and then God trusts us to use that enough, to make the world, a little more like what Jesus comes to show us. So, thanks for your time today. Blessings on your conversation, and hopefully see you back next week.